Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the program, to the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thank you for rejoining us. Very interesting discussion before the break with our crew from ACR, Hesher and Ruckus, joining us there for a little analysis about Elon Musk. We're going to switch gears right now, and we're going to talk about Donald Trump, but also about the Middle East, specifically Israel and Palestine. And I want to welcome onto the stage a very special guest right now. His name is Dr. Zachary Foster, Palestine Nexus. He is the editor of this amazing website and also a fantastic newsletter. We'll throw up some details about his work and where to find him just later in this segment. But let me bring him onto the stage right now. Zach, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Patrick, thanks so much for having me back.
No, it's our pleasure indeed. First of all, if you introduce yourself, Zachary, for our listeners, who people who aren't familiar with your work, how you got into your sort of area of expertise right now. I think you're probably one of the leading independent scholars, at least on the minute-to-minute analysis of what's going on, and also providing the history of the region, which I think you offer on Palestine Nexus. You run courses as well. For people. So if you can just introduce yourself and what you're doing right now, Zachary.
Thanks for that introduction, Patrick. I did a PhD in Middle East history at Princeton, focusing on the history of the Palestinian people, the origins of actually the word Palestine. When did people start to call themselves Palestinians? I also write a newsletter called Palestine in Your Inbox, where we try to provide historical context for the present moment. We just published a piece on the long history of ceasefire agreements between Hamas and Israel, for example, in which, wait for it, Israel has violated every single ceasefire agreement it signed with Hamas. So we're trying to provide that historical context for what's happening today. And we also run courses. We have courses on Zionism, on a history of the Palestine question itself. And in this coming spring, we're going to launch a course on a history of the Palestinian people as well.
Yeah, so it's a great resource, folks. And again, if you go to X, and he'll be linked probably on this live stream right now, just go to Zachary Foster's X page there. That'll give you links. We'll also put some graphics up on stage towards the end of the segment. Now, on this issue, Zachary, I want to get your comment. This is our jumping off point here. There was a lot of talk before the inauguration of Donald Trump that there was a ceasefire that was in the works, and the anticipation was brewing. And as if by magic, Joe Biden announces that we've finally, at long last, after 15 months, we've reached a ceasefire agreement, and the hostages are coming home. And Trump has worked together with Biden to make this happen. This is basically what the headlines looked like at the time, Zachary. So Trump calls for, well, this is a separate article, but we'll go back to that in a minute. We'll talk about that, the ethnic cleansing aspect. But so what did you make of that? I mean, because I know yourself, you're very skeptical. Other really keen analysts were looking at that saying, hold on for a minute. There's something going on here. And I know that you're a student of the history of broken ceasefire agreements. So did you see some of the same things at play that you noticed from past promises of ceasefires?
Well, within days of having signed a ceasefire agreement, Israel violated it multiple times. They killed 2 Palestinians in northern Gaza City. They injured 7. There were reports of Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip shooting at Palestinians in the Netzarim corridor. Now we have reports today of delays with regard to Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip itself, especially with regard to the return of Palestinians from southern Gaza Strip to the northern Gaza Strip. Those reports are surfacing today. So all of this was expected. Israel has violated every single ceasefire agreement it's signed with the Palestinians since 2008. We could talk about that. So this is all very much expected. Having said that, I would emphasize that this ceasefire deal that Donald Trump's real estate investor, Witkoff, I believe is his name, he played a critical role, a vital role in pressing Netanyahu to sign this agreement. We've known for a long time that Netanyahu has had no desire to sign a ceasefire deal with Hamas. We know that because since October 8th, 2023, Netanyahu has repeated the point that the goal of Israel is not to come to a ceasefire and agreement with Hamas. It's the total annihilation of Hamas. And they've repeated that goal dozens and dozens of times over the past 15 and a half months. And that became especially clear in January 2023 when when the Israeli government assassinated Saleh Aruri, the newly appointed Hamas spokesperson based in Beirut, indicating that they weren't interested in talking with Hamas officials. They were interested in murdering them. Then, of course, what did Israel do after that? They proceeded to assassinate not the spokesperson of Hamas, but the Chief Bureau of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, who was at the time the main counterpart that they were speaking with in order to land a ceasefire agreement. So it was obvious already from the summertime that they had no interest in a ceasefire agreement. And then on top of that, they continued to press forward on in Lebanon, again, indicating they weren't interested in a ceasefire deal with Hamas. They were interested in eradicating Hezbollah and continuing the assault on the Gaza Strip. So this was very clearly the work of this Donald Trump envoy, Witkoff, I believe is his name. He played a critical role. There were a few other things to note with regard to the ceasefire deal. I think, first of all, public opinion polls have been shifting in Israel. Some indications are that some 60, potentially as many as 70% of Israeli citizens now support a ceasefire deal, not because they care at all about the people of Gaza or that they want to bring humanitarian relief to Gaza. No, they want the hostages back. And they know that the only way to get the hostages back, by the way, and the prisoners of war back, you have, most of these hostages are actually prisoners of war. They're not hostages because they were Israeli soldiers enforcing an illegal blockade, a suffocating blockade for 17 years. So they're prisoners of war. But the Israeli public wanted those prisoners of war and hostages back, which is, I think, ultimately what also played a critical role in explaining how Netanyahu eventually came to agree to this ceasefire deal. Also, the third point I would make is that the Israeli military has been suffering in Gaza. Some 25% of armored vehicles were reportedly destroyed. That figure, by the way, was a figure released by the Israeli military itself. We know even in the very last week, Hamas forces managed to kill something like 15 Israeli soldiers in Bet Lahia in the north, which was the very first place that Israel invaded back in October 2023. Here we are 15 and a half months later. They're still fighting in Bet Lahia. They failed to control a single area of the Gaza Strip. They failed to dominate any neighborhood. Literally, there's no place in the Gaza Strip that the Israeli military managed to clear out of Hamas fighters. So the military campaign was failing. The Israeli public wanted the hostages back. And then Trump's aide basically said, look, you sign a ceasefire deal before the election because we do not want to have to deal with this mess on day one of our administration. So for those reasons, I think we are now in stage one of the ceasefire, and we will see what happens with regard to whether or not the parties agree to move forward with phase 2 and 3. That remains to be determined.
So what's the length of time for phase 1? Are we talking about, at the end of February, beginning of March, and then what happens there? Could this fall apart? Could Israel turn around and say, well, and I think they've already done this with Lebanon, but could they say, well, Hamas or, like they did with Hezbollah, they're not abiding by our terms, therefore we're not going to, observe a ceasefire. What are the odds that might happen, Zachary, phase 2, 3?
Right. So the phase 1 is supposed to last for 42 days. And beginning on day 16 of phase 1, which is coming up, the parties are supposed to begin negotiating the terms of phase 2, right? Because during phase 2, Israel is supposed to complete its withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, that is the border separating Gaza and Egypt. That process is supposed to come to completion, I believe, in the 8 or 10 days or so following the end of phase 1. Israel is also supposed to agree to a further list of Palestinian prisoners of war that they've held captive for, in some cases, years, if not decades. The two parties are supposed to agree to a further prisoner swap in which Israel will agree to release however many Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the prisoners of war captured by Hamas on October 7th. Israel will also agree to continue to withdraw from further areas of the Gaza Strip in which they're currently maintaining a presence, including in the north, in Beit Lahia and Jabalia and Beit Hanun, as well as in the Netzarim quarter, as well as in that 750-meter security zone that they've established surrounding the entirety of the Gaza Strip. So that should begin in phase 2. Now, whether or not Israel will actually agree to move forward remains to be seen. What we know is that the coalition government in Israel includes Bezalel Smotrich and his National Religious Party. And Smotrich has already said, if phase 2 proceeds as planned, I'm going to withdraw from the coalition, which would mean a collapse of the coalition. And so, and by the way, Ben-Gvir, the other member of the other far-right member of the coalition, has already pulled out of the coalition. Netanyahu managed to pull in Yair Lapid, a center-left politician. Well, there's no real left in Israel, but let's call him a center politician, into the coalition in lieu of Ben-Gvir. So right now, the coalition is managing by a thin thread, and it will likely collapse in the event that Netanyahu signs and moves forward with phase 2. We already heard we already heard U.S. President Donald Trump say multiple times in interviews in the past week, I'm skeptical, I'm doubtful. I can't recall his exact words, but when asked whether or not he believed the ceasefire will hold and will continue on to phase 2 and phase 3, he said, I'm doubtful. So, and then in addition to that, we've already had announcements from Bibi Netanyahu himself saying, I don't have to, this is a one-phase deal. That there's nothing in phase 1 that prevents me from scrapping the deal and carrying on with the genocide. He said that openly. So I think and so the real question is, will Trump insist that this deal continues onwards? Or will Trump just let Netanyahu do whatever he wants? As we all know, Trump is a wild card, very hard to predict. So it's not really clear what will happen. I would say, look, if it's Trump making the decisions, I bet the ceasefire will proceed forward. But if it's Trump's cabinet members making the decisions, his Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, or his proposed Secretary of Defense, Sedgwick, was it? The former Fox.
Yeah, I don't think he'll have much of a hand in it, but definitely Rubio and his sort of close advisors. You mentioned his envoy there to the Middle East. A lot of it is the question of, I know Donald Trump doesn't seem to me, Zachary, I don't know if you agree, of somebody who bothers much with details and nuance. So I mean, he can be manipulated, and the Israelis are the masters of these, working these sort of deals in their favor, creating leverage, demonizing the other side, setting them up to fail. This has all been done before.
Yeah, I mean, his ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said already more than a decade ago, there's quote unquote no such thing as a Palestinian. And then he said that the West Bank is actually called Judea and Samaria, which is the term used by Israel's far-right ministers, as well as Netanyahu, as well as many in the mainstream,
to describe more mainstream. Yeah, that term
to describe occupied Palestinian territory. He's using ancient biblical words to describe occupied Palestinian territory. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, he also said there's no such thing as occupation. There's no such thing as occupation. This is a person who believes 5 million Palestinians, 2 million living in the Gaza Strip, 3.5 million in the West Bank, should be permanent subjects of Israel's apartheid regime. They should be less than human beings. They should have less rights than Jews. That is what the United States ambassador to Israel has said openly. And that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about Trump's cabinet members, Trump's inner circle, the people that are advising Trump on Israel-Palestine.
And I'm going to bring up on screen something that you've shared on your feed here. Speaking of biblical references, Zachary, this is Elise Stefanik. She is Donald Trump's UN ambassador. And she's here. You said Elise Stefanik believes that the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan is illegitimate, and the true heirs of the country are the Moabites, the Edomites, and the Ammonites. This is the person who will represent the United States at the UN. I'm going to play this clip, and I want to get your comments. So, I mean, Wow, this is kind of like what we're dealing with at the moment. If Mike Huckabee wasn't bad enough, this is the UN ambassador. Listen to this. It's during a Senate confirmation hearing here.
But I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry, finance.
Smotrich, this is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank. And in that conversation, you told me that, yes, you shared that view. Is that your view today?
Yes.
Okay. But I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry, finance.
Smotrich, this is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank. And in that conversation, you told me that, yes, you shared that view. Is that your view today?
Yes.
Okay. But I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry, finance.
Smotrich, this is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that
It's just on repeat now.
biblical right to the entire West Bank.
Okay, so basically, they're saying Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank, and she's defending this. So, I mean, it's kind of an extraordinary state of affairs. And so these are people, what, Zachary, is it a case that these are true believers in end times biblical eschatology? Or are they just adopting these views because this is what IPAC and the lobby have told them they need to say? Sometimes I don't know, because I never noticed any of these people as being, evangelical Christian Zionists before. But then again, maybe they were selected because of that. Certainly with Pete Hegseth, that's actually the case. He's a Third Temple kind of cultist in that respect. But this extraordinary, this exchange, Zachary.
We have the U.S. ambassador to the UN who believes that in order to determine who has the legitimate right to any piece of land, what we need to do is we need to go back into history. We need to go back 3,300 years ago and determine what group lived there on the land 3,300 years ago. Why 3,300 rather than 4,300 or rather than 2,300? Well, that's because apparently she is a Bible-believing person and believes that God promised the land of Israel to the Israelites, whose offspring are the modern-day Jews. Itself, obviously, a bogus claim that has been debunked by countless historians. We know there were mass conversion events in Jewish history in which, for example, all Ashkenazi Jews are descendants of about 100 people. So, leaving aside just the pure insanity of the claim that we need to go back to some random point in history, we're dealing with a person who has no regard for international law, who has no regard for international humanitarian law, which is evident because if she believed in international humanitarian law and international law, she would be citing not the Bible, but she would be citing the UN Partition Plan of 1947. She would be citing the UN Declaration on Human Rights. She would be citing the Rome Statute. She would be citing the Genevan Conventions of 1948. Now, these are the conventions that help us understand who has a right to Israel-Palestine. Who is Israel occupying the West Bank and Gaza? Is Israel imposing an apartheid regime there? Those are the relevant statutes and treaties and documents that you would be referring to if you were representing the United States at the UN. Unfortunately, we have a biblical literalist based on texts written 3,300 years ago, trying to make determinations about who should live in the Holy Land, who has a right to control the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, Patrick, I don't know if you knew this, but I'm actually an Edomite, and I have a right to Jordanian citizenship, and I have a right to extra special privileges in Jordan because my great grandparents from 300 generations ago once lived there, and all the people who live in Jordan today are all illegitimate. I mean, that's literally what she's saying.
So, and it's I think it was it Mike Huckabee? Yeah, Mike Huckabee said live on Fox or one of the news things. He said, "Whoa, Gaza. Oh, we tried a Palestinian state in Gaza, And look how that turned out, he said. Like he basically thought that Gaza was a Palestinian state. And then he goes, for 3,500 years, Israel has had an autonomous, independent homeland in the Middle East for 3,500 years. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is the guy that the President of the United States is sending as the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And I'm like, what planet is he referring to with his geography and his history? Because it's not Earth. It must be some other planet in the solar system. I honestly, I was blown away that somebody who used to be a governor of a U.S. state is that ignorant or would say such craziness. Is considering the sensitivity. They don't really, I don't think, care about the sensitivity of their positions at the moment. It's kind of an intellectual free for all. You have to admit. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, I was gonna bring up a related case of this sort of biblical fantasy, biblical insanity, and that would be the head, the current president of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Her name is Julia Sebutinde. Perhaps you are familiar with this woman. She was the only member of the 17 judges on the ICJ who voted down all the provisional measures that the ICJ voted on. That is to say that in the January decision, in which the ICJ said Israel is plausibly carrying out a genocide, there was one dissenting voice, okay, of the 17 judges who she was the only one to reject all the provisional measures. And it turns out she's a diehard a Christian who believes in these biblical fantasies, these eschatological fantasies about the end of days. And I recently just uncovered, this is breaking news, actually, Patrick. But we're going to break right here on your stream.
Okay.
She plagiarized large sections of her dissenting opinion. This is I just broke this today on Twitter. If you go into that dissenting opinion, first of all, she has like 750 words on ancient Israel, on biblical Israel. First of all, ask yourself what that has anything to do with international law, what that has anything to do with genocide in the Gaza Strip. Well, the short answer is nothing. But nevertheless, she goes into this diatribe talking about the ancient history of the Jewish people, in which she talks about in 135 CE, Hadrian vengefully erased the Judean presence in the land. And in spite of the Jews, Hadrian replaced the name Judea with Palestinian Syria. She lifts this, she has 3 sentences in which she completely lifts. It's basically a word for word copy paste from a piece published by the Hudson Institute in 2021. And then to make matters worse, she regurgitates 4 sentences. She cites 4 sentences, which are, again, virtually word-for-word copies from the Jewish Virtual Library, which is itself a propaganda organization. If you scroll down just one more right there, that tweet, it's all in the open. I mean, she's literally plagiarizing passages about biblical history, about the Roman history of Palestine. She's plagiarizing this history from a 2021 piece published in the Hudson Institute, and then she's plagiarizing the early history of the mandate period, the British mandate period in the 1920s and 30s. She's plagiarizing that history from the Jewish Virtual Library, citing Auni Abdul Hadi, lifting entire passages from the Jewish Virtual Library. So we're talking here about the president of the world's highest court. Okay, this person she wasn't president. After the former president was recently took the position of president of Lebanon. She was basically second in command. She was backup, and then she was appointed effectively acting president of the ICJ on January 14th, so about 2 weeks ago. And so she's leaving aside the insanity of writing biblical history into an opinion about genocide in the Gaza Strip in 2023. She's plagiarizing that history.
This is just complete madness. And yeah, you're right. Nawaf left to lead Lebanon, left clearly a massive vacuum here, professional vacuum, and breaking the president of the International Courts of Justice, Julia Sebutinde, plagiarized sections of her dissenting opinion. You give the reference link there. You can go to Zachary Foster's X feed, and all the links are there. You can click through and see, in which she voted against all provisional measures of South Africans' case of Israel's genocide of the Palestinians. The name Palestine, quote, applied vaguely to a region that for 400 years before World War I was part of the Ottoman Empire, says Sabotaged. So, and she goes on, and it's just like, I think I know kind of what's happening here, Zachary. Not to sound conspiratorial, but this is somebody who has been captured, clearly, because she seems to have abandoned all professionalism or all objectivity. And there were questions about her before. Is she not one of the only ones who voted against the previous motion to advance the case of genocide? Was one of the only dissenters, if I don't recall, a year ago? Is that correct?
That's right. There were 17 judges on the ICJ committee that were that proffered their opinions on the South Africa case, in which South Africa was charging Israel with the crime of genocide. And there was only one member of the permanent sitting members of that committee who voted against all the measures. That was Julia Saputunde. And then there was only one member who voted against all the provisions. By the way, and that was, again, Saputunde. And even the Israeli judge who was appointed by Israel, Aharon Barak, even he voted in favor of one of the provisional measures, which called on Israel to cease genocidal statements, cease the genocidal rhetoric. I mean, even Aharon Barak looked at these statements. There are no innocent in Gaza. We need to, where Netanyahu likens the Palestinian people of Gaza to Amalek, not once, but twice. Amalek being the people the ancient Israelites were commanded to annihilate. Likening all Palestinians in Gaza to human animals. There are literally dozens of genocidal statements cited by that ICJ case. It's about 4 or 5 pages of them. And even Aharon Barak, the Israeli judge, said, oh, wow, we need to issue an order to the state of Israel to cease making genocidal statements. Even this judge who we're talking about, Sebutinde, even she voted against that one. So we're talking about someone who's just totally compromised. The Greystone recently published a piece in which they've determined she's part of this church in her home country, and one of her pastors, or one of the pastors at the church, is just this raging end of days Christian who just believes that Israel in 1948, it was a miracle by God in which the Jewish people have been reconstituted in the land of Israel in accordance with biblical prophecies, Genesis chapter 12 and 15. And she's part of this church, and presumably has come under the influence of these end of day Christian theologians, who, many of whom, by the way, are American theologians,
yes,
who are setting up churches all around Africa, preaching the word of God, claiming Israel is a miracle, is some divine intervention. And she's clearly been influenced by them.
Yeah, so she's from Uganda, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Yeah. So
Right.
American ecumenical, Christian, Pentecostal, Baptist, Protestant denominations and whatnot. This is also, from my research, and it's not conspiratorial, this has also been a very convenient cutout front for the Central Intelligence Agency over the years, as well as the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church, and the list goes on and on. But let me just bring this up because this is just kind of a no-brainer, Zachary, here. Published by Douglas Fife at the Hudson Institute, of all people, an arch neocon, an architect of the Project for the New American Century, who basically authored U.S. foreign policy pretty much till today, for the benefit of Israel. Let's not fool ourselves here. So that's where she's plagiarizing from. So she's clearly been given these references, told what passages to copy and paste, and she did a very poor job of footnoting. Clearly. I mean, so like totally unprofessional. She should be disbarred, actually, just for that infraction alone. For somebody in a high legal position, just to be doing plagiarism it's kind of, that's the kiss of death, like professionally, isn't it? You can't recover from that.
Here you are presenting yourself as a legal authority, and you don't even have the honesty to present to cite other people when presenting their work as your own. I mean, these passages are lifted literally word for word. She changes, a word here or there, but effectively you're talking. I mean, this is textbook plagiarism. I mean, if you're a professor at a university and you were handed a paper that had this level of plagiarism, it wasn't 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. There's at least 8 sentences that are just lifted whole scale, just word for word. This is presenting other people's work as your own, is dishonest, and it's disqualifying to even an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan, let alone the world's top court, who's supposed to be adjudicating cases of genocide. I mean, what do you even say to this? This is a total breach of your ethical responsibility and duty as a legal authority and a scholar, and everyone who has any regard for truth or evidence or data or honesty or integrity should call on her to resign immediately.
No, absolutely. It's pretty shocking, but I dare say I'm hardly shocked these days. Anyway.
And by the way, Patrick, if I just could say one other thing, I mean, leaving aside the plagiarism, leaving aside that she's even talking about biblical history in an opinion about genocide circa 2023, 2024. Let's leave all that aside. The history that she tells, she also regurgitates misinformation and distorts history. And this is, I think, most evident in her discussions of the history of the Zionist movement in Palestine. She says in her legal opinion, she cites that on the eve of Zionist immigration, there were only 250,000 Palestinian Arabs living in Palestine. Okay, so in the 1880s, there were only something like 250,000 Arabs in Palestine. This is just misinformation. Misinformation that is easily debunked by a Wikipedia search, by the way. The most authoritative source on demographic history in Ottoman Palestine is a historian by the name of McCarthy. And he's published a 250-page book just on the demographic history of late Ottoman Palestine, right? And on page 10 of that book, he cites the data. And it's like basically on the eve of Zionist immigration, you're talking about 460,000 Arabs. And by the 1890, you're talking about 500,000, which, by the way, according to almost every historian of Ottoman Palestine I am familiar with, and by the way, that's my specialty. That's a gross understatement because it doesn't include the nomadic populations. It probably doesn't include all women and children. So you're talking about a floor of probably 460,000 people, whereas she's citing and by the way, that figure is itself on Wikipedia, which anyone can look up. She's just making up numbers. She's making up data to help Zionists sleep better at night, right? Because the smaller the Arab population, the less of it an injustice the Zionist movement was, which is somehow, even in the way she frames it, she's essentially implying this is a settler movement and there's this indigenous population. So implicit in her own narration of the history is the point that, Zionism was a settler colonial project. She distorts the number of Palestinians living in the land. She has this whole paragraph in which she tries to claim that Palestinians never called themselves Palestinians. They always called the place, they always saw the Palestine as part of Syria. I addressed this point at great length in my dissertation. But it's not even really relevant here. What is relevant is the fact that she is narrating Zionist propaganda. She is narrating Zionist mythology. She's leaving aside, again, the plagiarism, leaving aside the fact that this history is not relevant to the question at hand, which is Israel committing genocide in Gaza. She's spewing Zionist propaganda and is doing it blatantly and flagrantly, distorting history, getting the facts wrong, plagiarizing at will, all the while completely ignoring the actual question that has been presented to her. And it's just absolutely embarrassing to see this person sitting in the highest position, in the highest court of justice in the world.
No, it almost seems to me, I know how politics goes in clandestine operations, and I'm sure you do as well, Zachary, that the changing of the guard in Lebanon, how things ended up coming out on that story was not by coincidence. So she was engineered into that position. And we're talking about manipulation with multiple states at a very high level and a lot of recommendations, leverage, maybe some, not even threats, but maybe promises or the United States saying, we really like Nawaf. He's top guy at the ICJ, great lawyer, great pedigree. We'd really like to see him. I mean, did Lebanon really need him to be leader? Probably not. He had a great career, fantastic job where he was. I mean, why would you want to go into the maelstrom of Lebanese politics? I wouldn't. And he's doing a perfectly good job, but he was a problem, wasn't he, at the ICJ? So, I mean, that's just me. I hope that's not too conspiratorial.
Well, we've known for more than a decade now that Israel has been meddling in the internal affairs of both the ICJ and the ICC. I mean, this goes back before the current prosecutor, Karim Khan. Before him, Bensouda was the prosecutor of the ICC. And there were attempts I mean, this is public, the reporting on this is well known. There were many attempts by the Israeli government to blackmail Bensouda, and then we saw most recently with Karim Khan, Israel tried to muster up this, accusation of sexual misconduct, even when we were told about this prosecutor, who, by the way, was celebrated by Israel when he was first appointed to the ICC as someone who would clearly not do anything about all of these cases being brought to the ICC by the Palestinian people. He at the time was believed to be this essentially Israel stooge. And even his first visit to Israel after October 7th, he visited Israel. And he was very clearly going to be someone who was going to prosecute Hamas. He was going to take, Sinwar and Mohammed Deif. They were going to be charged with war crimes. But after months and months of relentless aerial bombardment, of hundreds of genocidal statements, of tens of thousands of dead Palestinians later, he just simply couldn't hold back any longer. And so out came the warrants issued for the arrest for Netanyahu and Gallant, obviously together with Sinwar and Deif. And then Israel went on a campaign to blackmail him, to find dirt on him. And at the time, Israel was told, this guy's clean. He's a straight edge guy. He's super clean. You're not going to find anything on him. And they dug around, and it's very, very unclear exactly what is the nature of this allegation, whether it was trumped up, whether someone was paid to make this allegation. And they found some kind of sexual misconduct allegation, again, all with the goal of undermining the arrest warrants and undermining the ICC. But this has been Israel's motto and modus operandi for literally more than a decade now.
Yeah. No, that was pretty, to me, obvious how that was rolling out. And I mean, my disappointment to see Karim Khan in Damascus getting a photo op with the former ISIS head, al-Jilani. I mean, that's another story. But let's fast forward here, as we just got a couple minutes left, Zachary. I mean, I could really go into the hostages or the prisoners of war, the female IDF soldiers that were released recently that were supposed to have been impregnated by Hamas while they were being, raped in captivity, and none of that happened. They came out looking absolutely healthy, in absolute mint condition. But this is where the conversation is advanced to here, Zachary. And I want to get your comment on this, because I think this is a potential huge problem. Now, just to set the scene here, Zachary, the ceasefire in Gaza was basically parallel with an escalation in the West Bank by the Israelis. And the settlers were unleashed on the people, the Palestinians in the West Bank. And so it's like, yeah, we'll give you a ceasefire in Gaza, but basically the West Bank is going to be fair game now. And so that's like, it looks like that's what happened, Zachary. And then we have this: Trump calls for Jordan, Egypt to accept more Palestinian refugees, clean out the whole thing. So he's talking about pushing the Arabs into the peripheral countries. And I think there's actually a danger of this happening with Jordan. And I've been warning about it for like the last 4 or 5 months, that pressure release valve, if that's removed, and people are pushed into Jordan, it's going to create huge instability politically in Jordan, because the royal family is already on tenterhooks there. So, and what would that mean? The U.S. and the British would probably engineer some kind of regime change and change the reality. And then there's going to be a whole world of pain regarding the West Bank. And Israel has already said, and Trump has said, that he believes that's part of Israel, Judea and Samaria, Jordan Valley. What do you make of this? How concerned are you of this development, Zachary?
Where to even begin? Clean out the whole thing because the whole place is filled with dirty Palestinians? I mean, what is this even implying about the people living in Gaza, that they're all dirty? I mean, cleaning out, you want to ethnically cleanse them? The headline in every single front paper in the world should be U.S. president calls for the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. I mean, that's the headline here. Now, with regard to what pressure Trump can bring to bear on Egypt and Jordan, well, the answer is quite a lot, because Egypt is in a free fall. They've devalued the currency twice in the past 3 or 4 years. The Egyptian people are suffering tremendously. They're desperately in need of World Bank support and IMF support and U.S. support to prop up the currency, to prevent the government from going bankrupt. I mean, that's literally what we're talking about. We're talking about a country that cannot pay its bills, and it needs about 3 billion U.S. cents every single year to Egypt. They need that money desperately. And so, could the United States apply enough pressure on Egypt to open up the border and allow Israel to ethnically cleanse millions of Palestinians? It's definitely a possibility. I wouldn't put it past Trump to use that leverage. We know Trump loves to use leverage. Whenever the United States has financial investments abroad, those are the places Trump loves to apply the most pressure, right? NATO? I mean, he's obsessed with railing on the Europeans to spend more money for NATO. So of course he's going to apply more pressure on Egypt to open up that border. You can guarantee that. And if Egypt opens up that border, well, I mean, you can expect there to be mass uprisings in Egypt. The Egyptian people are livid. There's very few people on planet Earth that support the Palestinians more than the people of Egypt. The same is true in Jordan, where the vast majority of the people living in Jordan are themselves descendants of Palestinian refugees. We've seen for months and months now, on end, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan has been providing Israel and the United States with all the support they need. We saw that when Israel attacked Iran twice. Well, guess what airspace they flew over to attack Iran? Well, they used Jordanian airspace. So what has Jordan done to bring about an end to the genocide? Nothing. Literally nothing.
Here's Afshin Rattanzi, one of the great broadcast journalists in the world. He's tweeted here: Donald Trump lays out ethnic cleansing plan for Gaza. I'd like Egypt to take the people. I'd like Jordan to take the people. You're talking about 1.5 million people, and take them all. Just clean the place out, clean the whole thing. Over the centuries, says Trump, it's had many, many conflicts, many conflicts. And I don't know, something has to happen. It's literally a demolition site. Almost everything is demolished and the people are dying. So, I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations to build housing at a different location where maybe they can live in peace for a change, says Donald Trump. So he's like, Israel has basically turned it into a pile of dust. And because of that, the people need to go to a neighboring Arab country, says Donald Trump. And Afshin Rattanzi replies here: the rest of the world sees that a better plan would be to stop Israel's genocidal colonialism and allow Palestinians to live peacefully on the land that they have lived for generations. That would normally be a reasonable request, Zachary, in a normal situation. But for some reason, at least in Washington, in Tel Aviv, and London, and other places, that's no longer a reasonable request. Now we're talking about forced displacement of whoever is surviving this genocide in Gaza. I can't believe the press have not taken Trump apart for this. But this kind of tells you the atmosphere, Zachary, that we're in right now. I think it's somewhat worrying, to say the least. Go ahead.
Well, Donald Trump has clearly come under the influence of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the co-author of Israel's Peace to Prosperity plan back in 2018, 2019, which called for $50 billion in Gulf aid to the Palestinians in exchange for permanent apartheid, permanent Israeli domination of Gaza and the West Bank. The same Jared Kushner, the same real estate developer who just a few months before the great financial crisis in 2008 spent $1.8 billion on commercial real estate in Manhattan, the same piece of property that was worth less than half that a few months later. The brilliant Jared Kushner, the brilliant investor who lost literally $1 billion on real estate back in the day, the same brilliant Jared Kushner who needed his father to get into Harvard University. This is the guy that has Trump's ear. And he's the one telling Trump, Gaza's beautiful weather, beautiful beachfront properties. I mean, this is what Trump thinks. This is who's informing him and advising him. People who believe that, Gaza's destroyed. Well, just get the Palestinians out of there so Israel can build beautiful beachfront property. I mean, that's the plan.
And it's opened up this kind of very racist, ethnic cleansing discourse that used to kind of be on the fringes, and you'd hear it sort of, comments off to the side with, some neocons and stuff like this. But this is like all over the place now. Here's a good example, Zachary. This is from an account called Quantum Flux. Sounds very sophisticated, but let me assure you it's not. And they're saying civilians could be relocated to Egypt and Jordan for humanitarian reasons. Then the cleanup can proceed. The cleanup. Most of them previously had passports from these countries anyway. Jordan was given 77% of the Palestinian mandate after all. That's exactly what you referred to earlier, Zachary. And here's the map. Luckily, there's plenty of land, says Quantum Flux, for the Arabs. There are 57 Islamic countries. So now we're not even talking about Arabs now. It's Muslim. It's Muslims now. So there are 57 Islamic countries, 12,250,000 square miles, 99.7% of the Middle East, 21% of the planet. Why can't the Palestinians just leave the Israeli settlers alone and go find another Muslim country to live in? It's right there, Zachary. This stuff is replete around the punditry, social media. To me, it's pretty disgusting. But this is how the discourse has sunk to this level. To me, is shocking in itself. It's unbelievable. If we applied this same logic to a few other situations I could bring up, I'm sure some of these people would not be happy at all. Go ahead, Zach.
This idea that there's so many Arab and Muslim countries in the world, why can't Palestinians just go to one of them? I mean, for how many decades have we heard this propaganda regurgitated? Propaganda which sees Palestinians as visitors in their own home country, in the country their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have lived and died in for centuries. I mean, it's just it represents the total dehumanization of an entire population. This idea that they're not Palestinians, they're Arabs, or they're Muslims and Christians. Why don't they just go someplace else? As if they haven't been living in their towns and villages and cities for generations. I mean, there's no people, very few people that I've met anywhere in the world who have as strong a tie to the land, to the springs, to the valleys, to the mountains, to the rivers, as the Palestinian people. I mean, it's a people rooted in land. I mean, on the eve of Zionist immigration, Palestinians were 80% farmers. They were agriculturalists. They tilled the soil. They harvested wheat. They picked olives. They planted grapes and barley and legumes. Palestinians are tied to the land. There's no people on planet Earth more tied to the land than the Palestinians. Why don't they just go somewhere else? I mean, it's just totally racist, bigoted, and ultimately, I think, is one of the reasons why we're here today, is this belief that the Palestinians don't belong in their own home country.
Yeah, here, look at this. So this high level analysis here goes on. The Arab conquest started 1,400 years ago and are still ongoing. Here are just a few of the groups still under threat by the Arab conquest. So we went from Arabs to Muslims, back to Arabs again. And they're saying Christians, Jews under threat from Arabs, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, Druze, Zoroastrians, Persians, Assyrians, Armenians, Copts. I mean, you have to be kidding me. And it goes on and on. And so people, new regions under threat, France, UK, Ireland, Germany. But these are the accounts that Elon Musk is boosting. These types of this type of rhetoric. He'll quote tweet it saying "wow" or "true" or "exactly" or one of these sort of based one word replies. I mean, the discourse is just plummeting so fast at 16 feet per second.
Yeah, I mean, look, when if you want to talk about conquest and empires, you really got to start with the British, because before the British, Jews, Muslims, and Christians in Palestine, they went on picnics together in places like Sheikh Jarrah, where Jewish musicians would play together with Muslim musicians, celebrating Jewish holidays. At the tombstone of Shimon HaTzadik in Sheikh Jarrah, you had Jews, Muslims, and Christians celebrating Ottoman holidays together, celebrating the Ottoman constitution together. There was a general, you had Jews and Muslims sharing residential courtyards where Jews and Muslims would play in the same backyards, and they would gang up in places like Jerusalem in the Al Wad neighborhood against Jews and Muslims from other courtyards and other neighborhoods. The fault lines weren't even necessarily Jewish, Muslim, Christian, let alone Palestinian Jewish. And this was Ottoman Palestine, a place where religion was not the defining element of who you were. Religion, ethnicity did not define your rights. Only after the British occupied Palestine in 1918, that is when religion, ethnicity became the defining characteristic. That is what defined your rights under British mandatory rule. And I mean, this story plays out pretty much wherever the British and the French and the German and the American imperialists went. Divide and rule, divide and conquer. And you saw that in Palestine as well.
And we're going to wrap it up in a moment, but I think this is quite a significant thing you've shared here on your timeline, Zachary. This is from Basel Adra, and it's a video clip, and it's saying, now 2 days after no other land was nominated for an Oscar, settlers are invading my community here, Massafir, Yatta, burning and breaking homes. I'm honored for the nomination, but we're being erased while Trump lifted settler sanctions in the West Bank. Do people of Hollywood care? Please don't be silent. I'm going to play this clip here just so people get an audio on this.
المستوطنين قاموا بالاعتداء على خربة الطوبة، حرق جب وضرب حجار على المنازل.
So just give us some context on this, Zachary, because it's kind of extraordinary.
Well, Bas al-Adra is a Palestinian from the South Hebron Hills, specifically Masafir Yatta, which is among the dozens villages, towns in the South Hebron Hills where some 1,800 Palestinians live. About 2.5 years ago, the Israeli Supreme Court declared that all 2,000 of those Palestinians are slated for ethnic cleansing, that the Israeli military has a right to go in and ethnically cleanse them. And ever since then, these attacks by these settlers, they of course were long predated that this Israeli Supreme Court decision, but have only intensified in the past 2 years, in which Israeli civilians living illegally on occupied Palestinian land, that is on the West Bank, they every day or two or three enter these villages, Susia, Masafir Yatta, and carry out pogroms. They burn houses down, they burn cars, they attack houses, they kill, they injure, they maim. A Palestinian from Masafir Yatta, which is pictured, his story is described at great length in the film that was nominated for the Oscar, No Other Land. He is permanently disabled. He is paralyzed for life because a settler, an Israeli settler, came into the village and shot him. And what repercussions did that Israeli settler face? What was the accountability? Nothing. Israeli settlers, total impunity to injure, to maim, to destroy property, to kill whoever they want. And this is what you're witnessing here, of just these violent Jewish terrorists going on pogroms, destroying Palestinian property.
So they've been basically given the green light by the Israeli government, by the United States, really. This is always a line that U.S. governments have held with regards to settler violence in the West Bank. And it seems to me, Zachary, that this has completely been abandoned now. I think we can safely say.
Well, there were sanctions that were placed on a handful of Israeli settlers in the last year or two of the Biden administration. What did Trump do in week 1 of his presidency? He lifted those sanctions. He's very, very clear about what he thinks about the West Bank. The West Bank belongs to Israel. He greenlit annexation of the West Bank back in 2018. I mean, in his Trump V1.
Yep.
He believes the West Bank belongs to Israel. all of his advisors, all the ambassador to Israel, his secretary of state, all the people advising him on Israel-Palestine are all telling him the West Bank is part of Israel. It's Judea and Samaria. It's the ancient homeland of the Jewish people. And so anything that those Israeli settlers do, be it carrying out violent pogroms in the South Hebron Hills, or Hawara, or Ain al-Ahmar, or Susia, or Humsa in the north, or in Sabastia, it literally doesn't matter where you go in the West Bank. There are violent Jewish terrorists rampaging around, not on a weekly basis as it was before October 7th, but now it's on a daily basis, where they're destroying Palestinian property, where they're harassing Palestinians, intimidating them, entering their homes. I saw this myself. I witnessed this with my own two eyes in Humsa in the north. There's an Israeli settler. His name is Moshe. Every day, he enters the Palestinian town of Humsa, walks into the homes of the Palestinians living there, and takes his morning coffee in their living room just to intimidate them and harass them. I mean, this is the lives of millions of Palestinians in the West Bank today.
And they can't touch him. They can't really do anything for fear of having the IDF come down on them heavy and ruin their lives. Maybe get them evicted from their home. Who knows? It becomes a security, a security issue that needs to be commandeered or whatnot.
If you're a Palestinian and you put one hand on a settler who's in your region illegally, who's in your home drinking his morning coffee in your private property, if you put one hand on him, you will be arrested. He will call the Israeli military. They will come and arrest you. You will be imprisoned for having committed a crime in the future. It's known as administrative detention, in which you're detained, imprisoned indefinitely. You can't present a legal defense because you haven't committed a crime. You've committed a future crime, and the evidence for the future crime that you've committed is secret, so you can't even present a legal defense, and your detention is renewable indefinitely. And you've had some Palestinian prisoners who have been in and out of Israeli prisons for literally decades. Mm-hmm. Khalida Jarrar is one of them, who just was released in the first batch of Palestinian prisoners. She spent the better part of a decade sitting in Israeli prison on charges of administrative detention, meaning on no charges at all. She just was taken hostage and she was just released. And there's thousands more prisoners just like her. And that's what would happen if you were a Palestinian and you put one hand on an Israeli settler who's terrorizing you.
Yeah, that's day-to-day life here. And just before we break up, and I appreciate your time, Zachary, there's so much to cover, but this is just such a striking image, which you have also shared on your timeline here. Images emerging from Gaza are haunting. This is a site where Palestinian captives were forced to strip. Their clothes were left behind among the ruins as a reminder of what Israeli soldiers did. I mean, look at this. This is just unbelievable. Anyway, we'll see if we can listen to some of the audio here. Hold on.
في شمال قطاع غزة، وكانت في المنطقة هاي بالتحديد تجمعهم أمام هاي الصالة وتدخلهم وتطلع منهم أعداد معينة ومن ثم تقوم بتفتيشهم.
I mean, Zachary, this is just, I mean, if you ever needed an image to define this horror, this is one of them.
Patrick, you know what that image reminds me of? And it's just the first thing that comes to mind when I see images of hundreds of people's clothes just all bundled together. It reminds me of going to Auschwitz. It reminds me of the room in Dachau where the clothes of the Jews who were put in gas chambers and exterminated remain. Those Palestinians whose clothes is just scattered about, the hundreds of Palestinians, guess where they are? They're in Israeli torture dungeons right now. What crime have they committed? Well, they were born Palestinian in the Gaza Strip. That's the crime that they committed. They were stripped naked, they were humiliated, and they were brought into Israeli torture dungeons where not one or two or three, but dozens of Palestinians have mysteriously died in the past year and a half. We've had, I believe it's in the 30s now, of Palestinians who just, their bodies are literally emptied out in Gaza. What does Israel do after it kills a Palestinian prisoner? It puts it in a dump truck and takes it to the border with Gaza and just dumps the body there. And that's what we're witnessing. civilians. We had 1,000 Palestinians from Gaza released in the first phase of of this prisoner swap and ceasefire deal. There were 1,000 Palestinians who, according to Israel, did not commit any crime associated with October 7th. They were just rounded up just because they're a Palestinian man. The war on men, the war on Palestinian men, they were rounded up, brought into a torture dungeon, deprived of food, deprived of water, given 1 minute to take a shower every week, held 24/7 in handcuffs, both handcuffs around the hands and around the feet, forced to remain in very uncomfortable positions. We've had dozens of cases where Palestinian prisoners had to have their limbs amputated because of the treatment that they suffered in Israel's torture dungeons. So it's just absolutely horrific seeing those photos, especially photos that remind us of some of the most horrific images and scenes in all human history.
Yeah. I mean, we're living that moment in history here, and it's pretty incredible. The Israelis are absolutely reeling over Hamas's show of force. We'll put some of that, some images there. I mean, they just beside themselves because Netanyahu has been saying Hamas has been eliminated for so long. This is an Israeli propaganda account here on X. But Hamas is out in force, Zachary, and from reports, even Tony Blinken himself admits they've replenished their ranks. So one has to ask, from a military point of view, what was the last 15 months about for Israel? Well, it wasn't, I don't think, about anything but killing Palestinians, quite frankly. But there's Hamas. They're still there. They're not going anywhere, are they, Zachary?
Well, if there's anything we can say for certain about the first 15 and a half months of Israel's genocide and war in the Gaza Strip, it's that they have turned Hamas into a heroic organization among the people of Gaza. It's never been easier for Hamas to recruit fighters than it is today. I mean, they're being greeted at heroes welcome on the streets of the Gaza Strip. Every single 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kid, every 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid today growing up in the Gaza Strip wants to be a Hamas fighter. Well, obviously they want to be Hamas fighters because for 15 and a half months, they've seen their families ripped apart. They've seen their brothers and sisters shredded into a million pieces. And then at the same time, they see videos of fighters wearing, in sandals and jeans, firing homemade rockets that they engineered themselves in tunnels at those Israeli soldiers carrying out the genocide. But who do you think they're rooting for when they see those missiles fired at Israeli tanks and Israeli armored personnel carriers and Israeli bulldozers and Israeli quadcopters? Who are they rooting for? Who do they see as the heroes? Israel has made Hamas. I mean, by the way, on the eve of October 7th, there was a lot of criticism of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. People were unhappy about many policies. They were unhappy about Hamas's imposition on Gaza's economy. You had Hamas trying to start its own farms, grow its own tomatoes and strawberries. Hamas was heavy-handed in the economy. They were imposing taxes on street vendors and taxi cab drivers. Now, these people are heroes. I mean, Israel has turned an organization that probably had the support of less than half of the Palestinian people of Gaza into a heroic organization standing up to the most powerful military in the world, the United States.
Yeah, that's how it's going to be written. That's the reality. That's the real narrative. That's the real takeaway of this situation. Dr. Zachary Foster, I really appreciate you joining us. Palestine Nexus is the name of your publication, and just give a shout out where people can find your work, Zachary. I'll try to bring your account up on screen here, but direct people to where they can get involved in what you're doing.
You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is _Zach Foster. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, which you can find at PalestineNexus.com. And you can also check out some of the courses over at PalestineNexus.com as well. We have a course on Zionism, a history of Zionism, as well as a course on the Palestine question, a history of the Israel-Palestine question. You can find all that on PalestineNexus.com.
Yeah, yeah. I know some people that subscribe to your course as well, and incredibly informative. And this is the sort of level and depth of information and historical background context that you need, because this is very complicated when you engage in debates on this subject. It's just, mired in minutia. And so you need to be equipped to be able to navigate this. And I think that's one of the public services that Dr. Zachary Foster is performing at this very important time in history. Zach, appreciate you joining us on the Sunday Wire this week.
Thanks so much for having me, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Dr. Zachary Foster. Look, we're going to take a break right now and try to see if we can catch up with our cohort on the other side from ACR, Hesher, also Ruckus as well. We've got a few other things to cover. Some incredible things going on in the world, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to do our best to walk you through there. In the meantime, we're going to hear a tune from our friends at Red Rumble, amazing band. This is their recent video, Turn to Dust. We'll see you in a few moments. Stay with us. We'll be right back.